Anyway, go ahead.
You have a better hairline than I'm looking at these days. I'll tell you that much.
Okay, here we go.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Coleman from Buckus Staceyson Institute for the Humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. Today, we've lassoed Thaddeus Kaczynski, and we're going to talk about his article on teaching. Thaddeus is up against, as many of the teacher is, time restraint. And so I will bypass the typical jibber jabber and spare you an advertisement and simply greet yourself, Thaddeus. Welcome, and tell us a bit about yourself as I pull up our article here.
Yeah, so I've been teaching for decades, and I do philosophy and humanities, and I've taught college and high school and in classical institutions. And, from my experience, I've discovered perhaps some of the pitfalls and some of the proper methods of teaching and what to look out for and what to look for. So that's what I talk about in the article here.
Excellent. And the audience will avail themselves of our discussion from this past spring of this year of grace 2024 between Thaddeus and myself, looking also at education and some points about classical education and these bits, and that's down below. But for today, we have really a great article from one of Thaddeus's new websites, Children Beware of Idols.substack. And so I'm going to read a bit here, and we're going to jag from there. So the liberal arts are ends in themselves, surely, but not all liberal arts are equal, and this should also manifest itself pedagogically. That's teaching philosophy. Grammar must be ordered to logic, grammar and logic to rhetoric, the trivium to the quadrivium, all 7 liberal arts to philosophy, and philosophy ordered to and practiced in the light of revealed theology. In turn, theology must be fecundated, excellent, must be manured, fecundated, enlivened, purified, penetrated by philosophy and dialectics. Indeed, by all the liberal arts. That which is lower than theology should not be glossed over and given short shift due to immoderate religious zeal or an orthodoxy at all costs mentalite. For this suggests a fanatical and eminently unphilosophical mindset.
Yeah, we could talk about that part there. You want just that last sentence is worth talking about.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Ardo, you can go.
What's that, sir?
Would you like to talk about that part?
Yes, and I think this is an excellent point. And building off of our chit chat about pedagogy earlier this year, I'll recite the sentence again and make my point. That which is lower than theology should not be glossed over and given short shift due to immoderate religious zeal or an orthodoxy at all costs mentality, for this suggests a fanatical and eminently unphilosophical mindset. So what I would contribute to this is that that's definitely hitting a few points I've noticed in these 20 years of teaching myself. And that is in these very dear communities, pick your adjectives, that's maybe a guessing game for the audience, but in a lot of alternative education, there's an awareness of problems in modern pedagogy in the public schools, in the universities. And then in idiosyncratic ways, I've seen it on a local level. The people, the parents will often heave ho almost into a cartoonish education where everything has to be religious, and anything that could possibly step on the toes of a certain religious interpretation, maybe not even actual official Christianity, but however the parents perceive things, that's verboten, and it doesn't help in these United States of our Protestant anti-intellectual past that has leaked into a lot of alternative ed, including a lot of Catholic circles who may not be aware of these dynamics.
Yeah, well put. There has to be involved. And what that means is the students get older towards the last couple of years in high school, especially. Dialectics, when properly done, is a dangerous exercise in the sense that the students are becoming responsible for their own understanding of reality. You're just a guide, you're a coach, you're a support, but you're not the guru. And the church, of course, who are the two teachers? The church and reality, right?
Mm.
Natural reality. You're an interpreter of reality. You are a more educated, more learned, and more experienced, and more mature interpreter of reality. But in order to enable the students to become their own teacher and to become an independent reasoner and to have their own lens that they own on reality, it's a thing. And you have to risk that a student might, wander off, and you have to allow that. You can't have fear and manipulation and rhetorical almost compulsion as your methods. You got to allow the dialectic, and you got to allow the inquiry, and it's a balance between guidance, loving, charitable, prudent guidance, but also free exploration. And it's a tough balance to accomplish. It's an art, but you can go into two directions. You can go in the direction of answers without questions, which is what we're talking about here. You could also go in the direction of kind of nihilistic questions or skeptical questions without answers. And if you've got a very religiously minded, fear-based, more traditionalist ethos in your school, you're going to certainly be pressured to move towards that answers without proper questions mentality. And so students might have right opinion, but they don't have knowledge. But as long as they have those right opinions, and you know what they are, don't you? Right? You're the hardcore Catholic, classical, traditional, and it's dangerous and it's irresponsible of a teacher to be like that. So I'm getting at there. And there's ways in which a curriculum can help provide that balance, but of course, the proper understanding of the Socratic method and open inquiry and how to balance guided Socratic tutorial with open-ended inquiry, and allow the students to become their own, do their own inquiries really, and make reality their own. You have to let them be. You have to do that enough.
I taught in one of these so-called traditional schools for 11 years, and if the audience is interested in that, I wrote a book that you can get from Apuxta Stacey's Press, An Excess of Love, and it's all about those dear dead days gone by. But I recall, Thaddeus, speaking about the opposite rubber banding, that the curricula that we used for civics, the keystone text was this series of essays this dear man, this dear conservative 1990s Republican wrote. And this was supposed to be the keystone of the entire civics curriculum that was authored. And it was this dear gentleman, obviously good-willed and wanting the best for youth, but it was just one collection of his thoughts about the politics of the day after another.
Well, yeah,
and nobody noticed that. Nobody noticed that was not appropriate material for an academic environment.
Or you can have a maybe more advanced, more high culture version of that in college or grad school, where you only teach a certain idiosyncratic interpretation of Aristotle or St. Thomas, and you kind of don't even you just disparage very subtly any kind of alternative to this particular narrow interpretation of the Catholic intellectual tradition. And and that can happen as well on the philosophical sciences and in theology. And this is where the traditionalism as an ideology can really be pernicious. I mean, in theology, there's strict Thomism, manual Thomism. There's a more communal Balthasarian approach. And of course, we want to stay away from that, don't we? Because that's Vatican II, and that's
Well, some
and
dude on YouTube told me about that, Thaddeus. I know everything because I got some subscriptions.
yeah. So this is something to be wary about, and it does a disservice to the students. You have the right and obligation to be a limpid, fruitful, transparent pointer to the fullness of reality as much as you can, but
Mm.
you don't have the right, and certainly not the obligation, to sculpt the minds of these students because we're in an emergency situation, and these are the things they need to know, and you know them, and it's a know-it-allism, and so that's what I'm talking about there. Yeah.
Yes, well, I've noticed that too. In the dynamics of this world, very often, one extreme, I believe, often are created in order to provoke an opposite extreme. And one of those I heard from a gentleman who was advocating homeschool, a Protestant American man, and he was cutting to the chase, and he was saying, well, look, the woke teachers, they're going to brainwash our kids. We might as well listen. Let's be real here. All teaching is brainwashing, and we might as well brainwash them with the truth. And you're right, that is just as ham-fisted and as disservice as so and so with the rainbow hair and whatever
Yeah.
in the school down the road.
Yeah, give them the right answers. You can't give answers to anyone.
Mhm.
You can't do it. And well, Jesus didn't do that.
Mhm. Mhm.
He didn't give answers. He provoked inquiry, and
Mhm.
he taught by example and with authority, but in order to allow for his disciples to see for themselves. That's what he wanted the most.
Mhm.
So yeah,
And
why don't we keep going?
yes, and speaking of himself and Socrates to boot, I'll read this section here and we'll boogie woogie. So, if either Socrates or Christ is banished from the curriculum and pedagogy of Catholic educational institutions or the soul of the philosopher, the result is theological totalitarianism or a dictatorship of relativism on the one hand, and a fanaticism or dilettantism on the other. Great 25-cent words here, Thaddeus. So there's a lot right there. Let's hold our engines here for this bit here. Right. The result is
Sure.
theological totalitarianism or a dictatorship of relativism if you banish Socrates
Yeah.
or Christ.
Yeah, well, so Socrates symbolizes the art of questioning and the kind of inquiry that is part of our existence, and the way that truth sort of is evoked and made possible through the right kind of questioning. And then, of course, Christ would be the answer to all questions.
Mm.
And so, that again, it's that balance of questioning questions and answers. Um, and if you don't understand the answers that you think you have and that you believe in, maybe if they even come from the authority of the church and doctrine,
Mhm.
or the natural law or something, if you don't understand the questions that you know to which those answers are answers, and if you haven't asked them really for yourself, like from an existential uh, passion, from a passionate existential inquiry. If you haven't done that, then those answers aren't really answers. Okay, they don't fulfill the function of answers of truth, right? And so the best thing about teaching is to cultivate an atmosphere, an ethos, in which students will be trained and prompted to and inspired to do inquiry
Mhm.
and to know how to do it well, to know when to stop and to rest in a conclusion that one has achieved through inquiry, but to also know when questions need to be answered, and continue to be, I mean, posed. And you're not an answer man as a teacher, and that's not what I remember teaching at a college, uh, in its early days, and I was teaching in this way, and
Mm.
a student came up to me one day and was really upset and say, you know, I spent a lot. My parents spent a lot of money to send me here because they wanted me to know the answers to things, and you're not giving it to us. You know, it's a ripoff. You're
Mm.
a fraud, basically.
Oh.
And then a few years later, when she, you know, matured, she came back and saw me and said, "Oh, you know, I was wrong. I realize what you're doing now."
Mm.
But that was the and some of my fellow teachers also thought of me that way.
Hmm.
So it was there was definitely this dynamic going on.
And I think part of this is explanatory of a lot of various communities with various adjectives, conservative, traditional, whatever flattering titles we give ourselves. um, I go back to these idiosyncrasies that we see in these communities, and one of the things I try to remember to let people off the hook a little easy is that when it comes to education or family life or a whole slew of things, a lot of us were not given really good role models and examples of what a real Socratic classroom or an actual classical classroom and education would look like. And I think that explains, I mean, you have a lot of people that are in the church, maybe 10 or 15 years. They are brand new Christians. They're coming out the world at 30 or
Yeah.
40 or 50 years of age. They're, back in the church, maybe 10, 15 years. And oftentimes they're getting all sorts of ideas and please God, true ideas, but they
Yeah.
don't have that foundation to build off, and it leads to this sort of
Yeah.
totalitarianism you mentioned.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fear in there, lack of freedom, rigidity, ideology, just a lack of richness and depth and complexity, because those are dangerous, you know. And I mean, they can be dangerous. I mean, we know the modernists, you know, will use these same arguments, right? They'll even say like, oh, you people who are traditional, everything, but the problem is they don't want dogma to be understood or believed, like, so they use the similar criticism I'm using. What I'm against is thinking that your present understanding of a dogma or some understanding of a church teaching is that church teaching, like like it's
Yes.
equal to it.
Hmm.
The church teaching, the truth is absolute. Okay, the being of Christ and his and the logos and the carefully Holy Spirit inspired articulations of judgments about this ineffable mystery of Christ, they are true. Okay, and they are absolute, and there's no better way to articulate them, and they just tell the truth. But do you understand them, and do you understand them in relation to each other and every other truth? I mean, that's a sort of an infinite asymptotic process. And so I call it the difference between absolute absolutism and relative absolutism. We are all relative absolutists, meaning that there's always going to be a relativity in our lens and our perspective, in the way that we understand and integrate reality in our minds. It's going to be bound up with history and culture and biography, and
Mm.
okay, that's ineradicable. Okay, but what you're trying to do is close the gap between that and the absolute reality. But you have to always recognize the distance.
Mm.
And fanaticism and ideology is when there's no more distance there.
I like that. Yes, that's well put. That's well
Yeah.
put. So, moving on here in this article, what is teaching? We continue. Both extremes display an anti dialectical, reactionary answers without questions ethos, whether the answers are the true ones of divine revelation or false ones of secular ideology. Such an institution, if a Catholic in affiliation and confession, may offer true answers to its students, but at the expense of the necessary dialectical questioning and Socratic ethos that is indispensable to render true answers, the answers to real questions in their hearts. Let me just say that again. And Socratic ethos that is indispensable to render true answers, the answers to real questions in their hearts. Similarly, on the personal level, such a philosophical quote-unquote answer man might possess true answers, but they would be poisonous to his soul and a bulwark for his spiritual pride and Gnostic inner circle certainty. Neil Postman suggests the right balance. And I'll read this quote and we'll jag on about that. So knowledge, Postman says, is produced in response to questions, and new knowledge results from the asking of new questions. Quite often, new questions about old questions. Here's the point. Once you have learned how to ask questions, relevant and appropriate and substantial questions, you have learned how to learn, and no one can keep you from learning whatever you want or need to know.
That's it. And that's what we should be teaching. That's from his really interesting book called Teaching as a Subversive Activity.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, it's worth a read. It's a pretty profound book. So yeah, I mean, I think that's what the art of teaching is to teach that skill. And it's not easy to do, but it seems to me that's what you're trying to do, and then you're teaching.
Yes, and also as a word of caution, I do believe there's a fair amount of attrition in people coming out of devout households. Praise God for that solicitude on the part of the parents, and coming out of very pious schools that have maintained their Catholic identity, or some of these Protestant ones that at least are consistent with their tradition. But there is an attrition, I think, that comes from these sorts, the super religious. And there's a danger when the child is completely brought up in a bubble.
Yeah.
And then in their 20s or 30s, they actually come across someone, with an idea and error, but someone that can actually argue and logically explain themselves. And this causes, I believe, a great deal of soul searching. And then eventually the person will feel that they were lied to. And
right.
and there was a defensiveness. Why was all of this just this facade put up? And that, believe it or not, leads to attrition.
Yeah, I agree. Yep, no doubt about it. You can't. I'm all for a certain amount of in-house protection and cultivation and formation in a particular religious tradition and moral lifestyle. Like, children need that. But yes, everything can be in excess. And I don't know if I told you about the guy I work for. Maybe I did last time, where he was this multi-millionaire guy. I was tutor for his family, and he just became a super traditional Catholic from Protestant. And he went right into SSPX from Protestantism, and
or you could say he stayed in Protestantism.
Yeah, well, I know,
to the chase.
Exactly. So I was teaching theology and liberal arts to his 4 children, and one day I come downstairs. He used to have a pretty good library, a lot of great books and things. I came downstairs and I noticed that every book was missing. They were all thrown out except for the Bible and the Lives of Saints. All the literature, all the philosophy, and he said, I said, what happened to the library? He said, well, Dr. Kaczynski, I don't see why my children should do anything but read the Bible and imitate the saints. I mean, salvation is the point, right? I don't see why they have to read Charles Dickens. By the way,
I have memories of being in this particular location that I alluded to, teaching 11 years at. And I also, amongst other things, ran the bookstore, or at least helped at the bookstore. And I would have parents come in and tell me this stuff, Thaddeus. I don't care about anything about my daughter as long as I don't care about this education. You know how that made me feel. I don't care about anything here. I just want my daughter to get married and have children, and that's beautiful. But my goodness, it's so narrow compared to the true Catholic tradition.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what I'm supposed to say to this guy. I mean, you can't read the Bible unless you have a liberal education, right? And so it's like he didn't even understand that. But this was the cartoonish extreme version of what we're talking about here.
Hmm.
Because there's also a way of reading literature and studying the liberal arts, which is just makes it kind of catechetical fodder. Actually, that I think that's the next paragraph. Actually,
Yeah, we'll get into that. I recall in Les Miserables, Victor Hugo has a very pointed sentence there when he's talking about Cosette's education in the monastery school, that there are some Catholics for whom history is simply an invitation to explain theology.
yeah,
Exactly
there
to
it
your
is.
point.
Oh wow, that's perfect. Yeah,
Okay, just as philosophy and theology must be held in the right balance, the curriculum must also hold in fruitful tension the poetic and the philosophical. The humanities must neither be seen as a mere poetic fodder for Aristotelian philosophy or Thomistic theology, nor must the humanities become hegemonic and all-encompassing, with philosophy dismissed as so much useless and pride-inducing abstract speculation, good only for the poetic meat one can glean from its otherwise scanty bones. To secure the right balance of the poetic and the philosophical is a complex matter. As Plato ironically yet unassumingly sophisticated and nuanced treatment of in the Republic reveals. But as Peter Redpath has suggested, without the right balance, philosophy becomes literally undergrounded, becoming neo-Protagorean mythopoetic sophistry under the aegis of political ideology. And poetry fails its charge to keep both systematic philosophy and theology in touch with the earthly realities of man's senses and imagination, through which all human knowledge has its origin, and in the excessive detachment from which the human intellect becomes unmoored, delusional, and dangerous. Wow.
wow,
And
that's a
as
long sentence. I just realized.
that's a mouthful, and as again, a lot of those 25-cent words in there that you're making me sing for my supper here. But yeah, I mean, there's a deep anti-intellectualism in America in general because of our Protestant background. But I think as we're having this critique of what calls itself classical education, um, that we really need to be conscious of the influence, I believe, of Calvinism and Protestantism in general into
Yes.
so-called Catholic circles, because it's just I see it everywhere. Once you know what Calvinism, and you see the exaggeration of original sin,
Yeah.
I see it everywhere now.
Yeah, and I don't know how we're supposed to avoid it. It's in the air. It's the water we breathe. It's so pervasive and deep and of course you can, once you see it, you might say, oh, I'm going to react to this. And
Mm,
in certain ways there's a reaction to Puritanism and traditionalism, right? Well, they don't like sacraments and they don't believe in the sacramental understanding of reality, and they don't understand the ecclesia authority, and they don't recognize works, and on and on and on. But the reaction, it becomes itself poisoned and somehow implicated in the error, in the same error. I
mm,
mean, you get a kind of traditionalist Pharisee Puritanism. I
mhm.
mean, it's like this fertility cult I see everywhere now. You ever notice that everybody and their mother puts the amount of children they have, like every time they have a biography, it's basically like a Calvinist would say, like, I have 6 businesses and I have this, and the
Yes,
Catholic says I have
yes.
6 children. And it's like, okay, why are you saying this as if it were some external indicator of holiness or success?
Mhm,
I mean, people have different challenges and stories, and like, just who cares?
mhm.
Who cares if you have this many children? Stop putting it in your bio, and stop saying it all the time at the beginning of your interviews. Um, and it really has become a weird Calvinist, like, external indicator of that you're in the elect. You know,
Mhm.
and so I have 6 children. My wife doesn't work,
I got
and
beard oil. I smoke cigars.
well,
I drink
yeah,
scotch. I
and
got
and
plaid
so
shirts.
and all it is just replacing some other external indicators.
Mm-hmm.
The Puritans had different ones. So yeah, it's frustrating to see that, and it's. I mean, the question is, how do you fight something you can't see or you don't even know that's there? And it's not easy. I used to think, right?
Mm.
I mean, I remember when I was first a traditional, I used to think if I just go to the Latin Mass enough, and if I just read enough pre-Vatican II popes, and if I just read enough St. Thomas, and
Mm.
if I just immerse myself in as many reactionary subcultures as possible, I'll just undo this damage. And it's like, okay, do you realize that you're doing this like with your mind? You can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. This is not
Mm.
something that you can just do through exertion of the will. Okay, and there's a sense in which modernity is an inescapable fact,
Mm-hmm.
and if anything, the church has to be the one to guide you on this,
Mm-hmm.
and the church has tried to do this, in the last century, and one has to really pay attention to this, how it was done.
Mm-hmm.
And instead you get people like, I don't know, you get these people who say, nothing after Vatican II is worth reading, and it's like, okay, um, it doesn't work. It doesn't work to have that
Mm-hmm.
opinion. Like it's not the Holy Spirit did not stop inspiring the church in its teachings in 1958.
Mm.
Now, of course, this is what attracted us to traditionalism was at the very heart of this experiment, there have been traitors and infiltrators and true modernists and Masons and others who have caused havoc in the church. And the situation we're in now is unprecedented with the present occupant. So of course I'm not a Mike Lewis or where Peter is. That's nothing to do with my critique or your critique.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yes.
but it's not. I just feel like this understanding of education somehow overlaps with the problems of traditionalism. I think, right? Because there's a similar mistake going on.
Yeah, well, you said something very, very insightful during our trial run, shall we say, of this particular episode, and that was in America this tendency for everything to become a subgroup.
Yeah, right.
And it's interesting that you see some of these. You could have the woke. I've seen more than cringy. I would say abusive parents with this woke stuff they do to their children, and that's bad. And yet, and the way the left, so-called, treats other people that don't hold to their all idiosyncrasies and every little doctrinaire thing, they go after them like a pack of mad dogs. I've seen the same behavior across the board because it's this phenomena of the subculture in America.
Yeah, it's Gnostic in a way. They're the little Gnostic subcultures, and you have to bear the earmarks of being part of the elect. And who decides what these are? It's arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
These are self-justifying communities, I call them. There's nothing that justifies what they're doing, other than those who are in charge of it, who say that it justifies it, and everyone listens to them.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point is that the church, Christ and the church, one of the reasons we have this community called the church, City of God, is to prevent this from happening. And to substitute for this a true community where the earmarks of the elect are known to Christ alone, in a sense, because of holiness. You don't parade around your fasting, right? You don't parade around the number of children you have. You don't parade around all these Pharisee indicators of superiority. And if you do, you're basically doing exactly what the Pharisees did. And I can't think of anyone Jesus was more angry at than the Pharisees. I mean, he talk about like compassion and mercy. But when he talked to the Pharisees,
Mm.
he pulled no punches. And that must be because that evil of hypocrisy, Phariseeism, substituting external indicators of superiority for true, holiness is the worst thing you can do.
Mm.
I mean, and so insofar as any community cultivates that and exacerbates that evil, you just run away. And are you still there?
Computer talking. That wasn't me now. I wasn't running away.
All right, so we lost each other for a while there.
Yes, it happens when I knock off the screen share. The StreamYard always lets me know that it's cranky. So I think that's a good place to put down the bird here, Thaddeus. I know you have a place to get. Want you to get
Well,
there.
maybe. Well, why don't we go for another 10 minutes?
Okay, that's very generous of you. Thank you.
Because I think we started at 6:10 or so. So.
All right. Thank you very much for that. We'll take it for 10 minutes more. Thank you. All right. So I'm just going to read this. I don't want to freeze up the program again. The audience can find the text in the description there.
Okay.
But or do you need me to put the text on the screen there, Thaddeus?
No, that's okay.
Okay, so the late Father James Schall has written, quote, "The last word of St. Thomas is not communication, but silence. And it is not death which takes the pen out of his hand. His tongue is stilled by the superabundance of life in the mystery of God. He is silent not because he has nothing further to say. He is silent because he has been allowed a glimpse into the inexpressible depths of the mystery which is not reached by any human thought or speech." And it goes on there, but there's, and I shall read, but you have that there. Also the appreciation, which I think is wanting across the board. Nobody is free of this, and that is the busyness that we see in education. And I don't care if it's the public school down the street or your college or your homeschool co-op. There is no place for silence, contemplation. So necessary to develop the ideas.
Yeah, that's a problem. And I do it too. I mean, that's one that's really hard to break. And how do you create a culture that promotes that and allows for it? And yeah, good question. I'm not sure how to deal with that one. Cardinal is really good on that one.
I think also in that temptation, which I know too, of busyness as a teacher, there's also just I suppose the capitalist ethos of you constantly have to be working. I know from my days in restaurants, if you have time to lean, you have time to clean, and you almost feel as a teacher you always have to be talking just to justify your role.
Yeah, that's right. And the best moments sometimes in a class are just these very subtle moments where there's a recognition of something in the student, and and you have to allow them to do it, but you have to get through the curriculum, and so it's difficult. It's a difficult challenge. Yep.
And we move on here. Although the real, that's a capital R, real, exceeds anything I or anyone else can ever say about it, there are truths we can and do know. There are truths we can know, truths that we do know. Thus, the knowledge of truth, which is constitutive of wisdom, must be the ultimate educational desideratum. But it is better, all other things being equal, to become those who love, for this is true wisdom, We're reading through the Book of Wisdom in the Liturgy of the Hours this autumn. So an
Mm.
excellent connection there. Wisdom, the whole church year has run by, and here we are. What has happened with our year? Have we become wise?
Mm.
Moreover, whilst seeing this reality as a philosophical and theological whole is a great good, inquiry into each part and aspect of reality according to its particular mode of being requires a study of all the disciplines, taught on their own terms and with a high level of rigor and specificity. And I'll be the first one to say that alternative ed needs to pick up the pace with rigor, with academic rigor and professionalism, because there is a lot of sloppiness. And I'm telling you, the state will use that when it wants to roll up all alt ed.
Oh, yeah. No doubt. No doubt.
Can you talk a little bit, Thaddeus? I think this is a real key. This may be, for me at least, the key of this delightful conversation. This idea of the love of learning, to become those who love, for this is true wisdom, and that dynamic in the instructor, and that dynamic in the individual love.
Well, I mean, it seems to be the whole point of Plato's Republic. Is to instill in the readers and the interlocutors, a love of justice for its own sake, a love of wisdom. Yeah, I mean, it's. I would say that, like, if you leave a student with, I mean, it's not only love, right? That they need to know how to obtain wisdom. They need to be guided, and that's what the liberal arts are. But it's the sine qua non, right? It's if they're not in love with reality and with knowing it and obeying it and plumbing its depths and just receiving it, if you're not modeling that in the classroom, because ultimately the point of what you're learning is to be integrated into your overall being, so that you become someone who is good. It is full of truth, and not just your being, not just your doing, but your being. So, and I guess at the core of that is to have this, is to have this sort of fountain inside of you that inspires you to keep going, and to keep questioning and to keep learning. And if you have everything, I mean, it's like St. Paul, right? If you don't have charity, but you have everything, everything.
Yes, well said.
It's akin to that. Just apply that to the educational sphere. I mean, he's talking about it in the big picture and everything, but in the educational sphere, I had a student who was going through the motions and just, he can get good grades. He was smart. And at some point, over the summer, and he comes back, and I had him again, and he said, the class you gave, I mean, the reading Plato especially, and C.S. Lewis, Abolition of Man, and the Bible, and these good texts, I've come to the realization that I have to keep going and knowing more. I have to know more. I must know more. And I have to be responsible for knowing, and not just more information, but I have to learn more about myself and the world and what it's all about. I have to keep going. I can't escape into fantasy and amusement and distraction, because I mean, he didn't say it, but what he was saying was, I love reality. Like, I have to, but he also said it's uncomfortable. He liked his old way. He was used to his old way of being, but he loved this new way, and it was growing pains. It hurt and it was difficult, but I could tell he loved it. Now, I couldn't have given him that, but somehow he was able to accomplish that existential mode and ascend to it. And now it's like he's 99% of the way there. Like, if he has that, he's going to be able to now be in the right mode with whatever he's learning. But what if you don't get that conversion or have that insight? I mean, then what's it all good for, right?
Yes, I mean it's interesting. As we record this here at Apucus Stacys, we have an elderly student who's dying, and uh, their studies were oriented from the beginning, and their own disposition, thank God, to the good, to the summum bonum, and what a disservice in this society, to fill students' heads, um, simply with this idea of so-called learning, to get a job, or to, I mean, it's the most vapid stuff. And it used to be people who believe that, they used to kind of blush and kick around ideas about a life of the mind and things. And now
Yeah,
they nakedly say it. They put it on their billboards and things, get a degree of success and
I,
get your MBA. And what a disservice. At least, your student and my student, they were oriented, that it was that the data led them somewhere.
yeah, and this person will hopefully keep going with this. And when it's time for him to study for a purpose that is useful, like a trade or a career, he'll know he's doing that, and he'll do it for the right reasons, and it'll be useful knowledge. But he won't think that that's the same as this other kind
Mm.
of the real education. He'll know the difference.
I
You
always
know?
think of that. Go on, sir.
No, go ahead.
I always think of that song. It's actually a spin-off of the old Labor song, I Dreamed I Saw Joe Hill last night. This one is I Dreamed I Saw St. Augustine last night by Bob Dylan. And there's a line there, and it's to the effect of, the youths who have already been sold, the youths who have already been sold. And
Uh,
that's true on a lot of different levels, but
oh
one
yeah,
of which is this monstrosity of job credentialism that's held up to the child from the breast, from the parents, from the society, even these so-called traditional people. It's so utilitarian, so bereft of love, and that there's no question why so many people, after these 15,000 hours in school, don't read a book for a decade after they graduate. I mean, there was no love of learning instilled in the rigmarole.
yeah. It's teaching them basically to be a kind of slave, and an idol worshiper. Speaking
Mm,
of my Substack, because you're basically all. I mean, this gets back to the meaning of liberal, right? Is
mm,
the freeing arts, the arts of freedom, because what you're doing when you're studying these topics, these subjects in this mode, is you're basically giving yourself the best goods, the goods
mm,
for your soul, the goods that last for eternity, um, the goods that make you a pleasing to God, that make
mm.
you a servant of others, to their souls. You can't be a slave if you're working towards those goods, because those goods are actually so precious they're not even useful in the worldly sense.
Mhm.
If you teach students that there are such goods and they're the ones um, most valuable, and then they see that no other human or institution uh, can use them, and once you know this, like you won't let yourself be
Yes.
used. Whereas if you're teaching them the way you're saying, you're basically getting them used to being just a use. Their value is their use.
Mhm.
And now, of course, we know that our value has to do with our use in the sense of in the mystical body of Christ, and as a good citizen and a good neighbor for the common good. But ultimately, all that is meant to make you a friend of God.
Mm,
And God wants your friendship for yourself and nothing else. He wants you.
mhm,
And that's the ultimate dignity, to be desired by, to have, that God wants a relationship of friendship with you. uh, and of course your goal in life and your core desire is to be friends with God.
mm,
That's what this all leads to. Whenever you do any activity for its own sake, it's a kind of worship, as Joseph Pieper would say, because it's a leisurely, right? It's you're transcending the workaday world at that moment.
mm.
whether it's taking a walk for its own sake or reading a book, getting used to seeing leisurely activities which culminate in worship as the highest type of activities then allows you to put everything else in perspective. Whereas the world wants you to never know about these things, never know they exist. Or if you do know they exist, to only engage in them as if they were useful. So turn them into a useful good. This is something that it's not Ivan Illich. Who am I thinking of? Jacques Ellul. Jacques Ellul talks about this. He says, but modernity can be defined as like nothing but means. There's only means. There's no more ends. Ends get turned into means, and the only ends that are there are arbitrary and meaningless. The ones that you create, but there really are no ends that you can discover that transcend the whole dynamic of means. And of course, if there are no ends, there's only means, and everyone's a slave. Everyone's a slave at that point.
Well, when we have you on next, Thaddeus, I'll give you. We'll pick up with a tremendous discussion on the word public, as in public schools, and what is the end of public education is to make public men. And it's hitting exactly what you're saying. Once you understand what the word public means, all of a sudden the public schools look at these ideologues and they're secretly, no, their job is to make slaves, and that's in their marquee.
Wow. I'd like to hear more about that. So
yeah. Well, we'll have to get you back on. I got to leave you wanting more to get you back on there, huh?
Sounds good. Sounds good, John. Thank you.
Right. For sure. So we'll let Thaddeus boogie down the road there. But to the audience, thank you for your attention there. Check out Thaddeus' stuff. Support him on Substack. And Thaddeus, especially, thank you for your insights on education, your passion in writing and expressing your ideas.
You're welcome. Very welcome. Thank you.